Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar where we're going to present our project called Golf Landscape: Biodiversity and Multifunctionality of Golf Landscapes, involving from NIBIO, Hans Martin Hanslin, me myself, Golf Risk, Christian Pedersen, who couldn't be here today, but then also Johannes Kollman from Munich, Tommy Lennartsson from SLU in Sweden. He also couldn't be here, unfortunately, and Christopher Marston from the UKCH. And the project was sponsored by RNA and by STURF. So this is the program for today, where we're gonna be sharing a little bit about the project and the key results. Then we're gonna have a panel discussion with Maria Strandberg, Jonny Kemp, and Edwin Wald, and then we'll have a Q&A session as well. So if there are any questions along the way, you should be able to put them in the question sections. That is a separate part from the chat, and then we will answer the question towards the end and have some discussions about them as well. So feel free to ask all the questions that you're thinking about along the way. So the motivation for the project was really to answer one main objective: to provide knowledge of how golf courses can be designed and managed to improve their contribution to biodiversity and multifunctionality at a landscape scale. So how golf courses interact with the surrounding landscape, and how the surrounding landscape can interact with the golf courses in a way, in terms of biodiversity and multifunctionality. From the start, we had 5 regions in which 8 golf courses were distributed, and those regions were, as you can see on the right here, in Europe, in Stockholm, Oslo, Copenhagen, the capitals of the 3 Scandinavian countries, in Munich, and also in Manchester in the UK. In all of these, we had 8 golf courses that differ in size and composition to try to get a broad spectrum of different metrics. We were primarily interested in land cover or habitat mapping, where we wanted to see different type of land cover structures in and around the golf courses, and we investigated these using high-resolution LiDAR and satellite-derived data. And we were interested in analyzing different landscape metrics, such as edges and landscape diversity of the golf course and of the surrounding landscape, but also such things as size, area, and different type of spatial heterogeneity. For the biodiversity part, we were looking primarily on 2 different aspects. So the first one was vegetation, where we did vegetation survey based on a standardized walk that is partly based on area and habitat proportions. So on bigger golf courses, we had a longer time frame to survey the vegetation. And we only surveyed habitat proportions of the golf courses that were higher than 3%, to avoid very small niche areas. But we also looked at birds. So we did these bird breeding surveys from May to June, and in total it was 5 minutes for a small plot on all of the golf courses, where depending on the size of the golf courses, it can be 3 of these small plots, and in some of them there could be up to 6. When we register all the birds early in the morning during these periods to try to get up the biodiversity estimates of these birds that were breeding or showing breeding behavior around the golf courses. So we're going to start with showing you some of these remote sensing aspects that we were doing to try to get into the detail of how they work. So this is the LiDAR and the satellite data over Manchester. And as you can see right now, it's a bit chaotic perhaps. But these are the golf courses surrounded in the Manchester area, with the ones surrounded in blue are the 8 that we selected for Manchester. And when we're doing these landscape analysis, we can get these land cover classes. And they include all sorts of different habitats and land covers that are in the area, but primarily based on the golf courses. That's why we have the fairway and greens and roughs and so on, but also other types of urban classes like buildings, sealed surfaces, and also water and forests and so on. So here's an example of one of the courses in Manchester, and we can see that the area in the middle surrounded by a blue outline is the actual golf course in question. And then we were looking at the buffer area around the golf course to serve as a outside landscape that we call buffer. And we can see that there's quite a big difference between the golf course structure with a lot of grassland areas like fairway, greens, and roughs and so on, but also some deciduous trees, in relation to the outside part, which is mostly urban, semi-urban structures like building and roads and similar things, but also water and forest and other types of fields are included, of course. And here's another example of a course in Manchester, and this is from Google Earth, I think, or perhaps a satellite imagery. And this is how we're used to seeing this type of course. But if we layer it with our landscape classification, you can see that all of these types of landscape classes come out quite clearly, and it's quite easy to mix between the two and actually see that the classes they make a lot of sense. They are very the classifications is quite clear for a lot of them, especially for like water and all of these grass types that are available on the course. But we were also interested to see if we could increase the accuracy of our landscape mapping by using drones. So in one of the Manchester courses, we took some of our drone equipment and we tried to survey them with similar equipment that we had done the landscape classifications to start with, to see if we can improve how good they are, both in how accurately we can measure certain classes, but also if that would help to distinguish, for example, rough and semi-roughs or greens or something like that, which the only real difference on a map scale is the height of the vegetation. So we have a little movie here, even we can see for you drone enthusiasts. So it's really quite interesting how the drones work and so on, with the results pending as well. So for the general results then, we found that the landscape metrics of the courses and the buffer, such as edge density and the diversity indices, were quite comparable, and that the plant and bird species richness and habitat richness increased with the area, which we can see in these graphs here. The graphs are oriented in plants, in birds, and in the unique habitat patches on the golf course. So, for example, the green would be one unique patch, and then the deciduous forest another unique patch, and so on. So you can see, look at it as how rich or how many different habitat types or land cover types there are on the golf course. And what we can see is that both the plants and birds and the patches, they increase logarithmically with size. But on the lower frames, we look at the density, which is the richness from the panels above, divided by the area of the golf course. So if you have quite a small golf course, but it has a lot of plants, then the density is a lot higher compared to a big course that might not have a lot of richness, then the density is lower. So there is this relationship between the density and the richness, but also with the area. But we also found that there is a positive relationship between the habitat richness density and the bird and plant species richness density. And what that really means is that if you have more unique habitat patches, like a higher richness, then you also have higher richness of birds and of plants. So it's clear that with more unique types of landscape structures and landscape habitats on the golf courses themselves, there is a potential for for more plant and bird species. And you can see the pattern is very clear, not only generally, but between the different the regions and between the sizes. I forgot to tell you actually, but you can see here that it's just 4 regions included. It's because the species data from Copenhagen, we were a bit unsure of the quality. So to make sure that these results that we find are as accurate as possible, Copenhagen was excluded from these species analysis. But if we look at the habitat mapping that we were doing, we can look at these classifications, and this is for the golf courses themselves for our 5 regions, including Copenhagen, where we have condensed the classes. So originally, I think the land cover classes covered about 17 classes, something like that. But you can see here that we only have 6 of them, where we have condensed a lot of them down. For example, the forest contains both the deciduous trees, but also coniferous trees. And the open class, it includes all sorts of different habitats, such as the green, the fairway, the rough, semi-rough, even agricultural areas, which of course on the golf course there aren't any, but in the buffer there are. So what we can see here is that there's quite a big difference between the courses. For example, in Oslo, there are like a little bit of forest on the golf courses, but it's quite evenly. While in places like in Copenhagen can be quite a big difference between the forest. So what we did is that we did a clustering analysis, which basically tried to separate out the courses in different types. So the analysis showed that some of the courses within each region, they were more open on average, and some of them were more forested. And this will come back then in the results later on. But then we did the same thing with the surrounding buffer landscape. And these are for the same courses in the same regions. And what we can tell here is that there's a lot of anthropogenic areas or urbanized areas that is represented by the red bars. And we can see in Manchester that a lot of the surrounding areas to these golf courses, they're a lot more urbanized or anthropogenic than they are in for example, Copenhagen. But as I said before, there are big differences within the region. So, for example, in Oslo, again, we have 2 courses that have very, very little anthropogenic influence or surrounding land cover structures, while some of them have quite a lot of it. So we can do a similar type of clustering here as well, that within each region, there are courses that are surrounded by more anthropogenic or more urbanized areas, and there are courses that are surrounded by less anthropogenic areas. Because when you do this clustering, you don't tell it what to look for, you just tell them separate these courses in some natural differences, and that's why these the more or less anthropogenic classes come out as leading differences in the habitats. So then what we did is that we wanted to see if there was a difference between these golf course clusters, the more forest and more open, and the associated buffer landscape clusters that are more and less urbanized. And here we can see for the plants that for the golf courses themselves on the left, there's no real difference in the species density, which says that it doesn't matter on a statistical level if a course is slightly more forest or slightly more open areas. But looking from the numbers themselves, the courses that were a bit more open, they had on average a little bit more species richness or species density, but it wasn't significant. However, on the right hand side, we can see that courses that are in more urbanized landscapes, they have a significantly higher plant species density, so it makes a real difference, which is really interesting. And this is for the birds, similar graphs with the same analysis, and the exact same pattern we can observe here as well, that the more open golf courses tend to have slightly more bird richness, but there's no significant difference. While for the buffer landscape, the golf courses that are situated in a more urbanized landscape, they are richer on average, which is really interesting. But we also have some other patterns that we've been able to see. So on the golf courses themselves, the roughs and the deciduous woodlands had overall higher plant species richness, which makes a lot of sense. But we also have a surprisingly low overlap in species composition between the habitat types, and this is what the graph here on the right represents. So, for example, the first bar here, it shows the unique species that are in the rough. And we can see that for the semi-rough itself, that we have some sort of transition zone between semi-rough and the rough. So in the semi-rough, they have some unique species. There are some that are shared between the rough and semi-rough, but that there are a lot of them that are unique for the rough. And for the fairway, for example, there are some shared between the fairway and the semi-rough, but there are very few that are unique to the fairway that isn't found in semi-rough. And the same for the deciduous forest, that there is some sort of transitional overlap in species composition for the plants, that the deciduous woodland, they have a lot of unique species, and then some of them that are shared. But we also found a considerable proportion of non-native plants in a lot of golf courses, but not that many red-listed ones, although there were a few, which I think one of the Swedish courses had, for example, 4 red-listed species, which is really quite good. But that we had a high number of red-listed birds, but a few non-natives, of course. And we also found that plant and bird richness increase with the golf course landscape diversity, that the more diverse golf course you have, spatially heterogeneity-wise, so how the landscape is structured, it also increases the richness of the birds or the plants. So you can kind of interpret it as the birds and the plants, they can accumulate higher richness being in a more diverse golf course. But we also could observe that the golf courses, they had some unique landscape elements that are not found in the surrounding buffer landscape. And this is what this graph on the right-hand side tells you. What it does is that it takes all of these landscape habitat elements and then it compares the golf course itself with the surrounding landscape, and then it gives you an average difference. So the peak of this curve here is at 0.67, and what it actually means is that the golf course is about 33% different than the surrounding landscape. So the golf courses do provide unique landscape elements that we believe are very important for the plant and the bird diversity. We did find that larger golf courses, as I mentioned, they contain higher species richness on average, but that even small courses can host rich species communities as well. And that the larger courses would likely benefit from having a higher habitat richness. That means more unique habitat elements to be able to continue to elevate their richness further. But we should also mention, of course, that the species richness is a proxy for biodiversity support, like on general, since the species richness is just a number of how many species you have of a certain group, but it doesn't cover how many you have of them, or the habitat quality of the golf course, or the complexity shared between these organisms, like food webs and similar things that require, of course, like a larger research project to investigate. So what are our take-home messages then? Well, first we can see that the regional context is very important when it comes to golf course design and management, and that it can complement the landscape. So we have the sort of interaction between the landscape and the courses themselves. that higher diversity and richness of golf course habitats, as I said, habitat richness, contributes to an expected higher plant and bird diversity, and that maintaining this habitat richness, the amount of spatial diversity and habitat diversity on the course should be prioritized during design and redesign of courses. And that since there's such a close relationship between the habitat richness and the species richness, this can be used as an indicator to investigate the support capacity for biodiversity on the courses, but along with other metrics, of course. And we also found that these methods can be applied by consultancies in their own solutions for design and redesign of golf courses, regardless of location, as this is a pattern we found throughout our 4 regions and throughout the golf courses in each region. Doesn't matter if they're small or big or if they have more or less of certain, but these patterns they apply everywhere. And include use of satellite data and habitat indicators to describe the composition of the landscape, both on the golf course and in the buffer, of course. And lastly, our results strongly support the importance of initiatives to include and maintain diverse habitats on golf courses, independent of the surrounding landscape. That is perhaps one of the most important factors, that the golf courses remain diverse in their habitat distribution, and that this is what really supports both birds and plants. Thank you. Now Johannes Kollman will take over, and we will start with the some of the panel discussions, where we have prepared a few questions that we'll talk more generally about.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. Very interesting. But maybe we allow a few follow-up questions. It was basically a crystal clear presentation, but it still might be that some of the attendees want to pose a question. Is that okay? I can't see all.
Yeah, that's okay. No questions written down in the Q&A section yet.
Okay, there's also nothing in the chat that wants to be addressed. No, I don't see things. Okay, then we would start the panel discussion. I could also show a few slides. I'm not sure I'm allowed to show something, Hans Martin.
Yeah, it should work.
Yeah, but here it's not possible to share. Okay. Yeah, now it works. Okay, let's see how this goes. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, but not the presentation.
Okay.
Only the
Is it now better?
no, we don't see your screen at all.
You only see the presentation mode.
Nope.
You can't see the presentation.
Nope.
Strange. Okay, then we do it without. That's also fine. I would start saying a few words following up on Carl's presentation, because one thing is, of course, then doing these landscape analysis within golf courses and also of the surroundings of the golf courses. The study Carl has just presented shows that there is considerable biodiversity and often the biodiversity is higher than in the surroundings, but certainly it is affected by the surroundings. And it might also be the other way around, that the golf course has a positive effect on the surroundings. That we have not checked so far, also not in other projects. Then if you do analysis of golf course biodiversity, even on a more detailed scale, you find out many species, but there's also potential for doing more. And all this idea of designing and redesigning would not make sense if there's not potential. And that's somehow the second foundation to the points Carl raised, that many of our golf courses have huge potential because they are roughs that are in a poor shape because it's too much dominated by a few grasses and sometimes even neophytes. Or some areas are unnecessarily often mown and could produce far more biodiversity if they would be less often mown. So it's enormous potential. Also on water courses, how they are designed, is it more linear one or is it more undulated? So that is my experience from the past 10 years, that there's huge potential. And then when funding is around or there's other incentives for the golf courses, then this redesign, restructuring takes place. And especially for flower-rich grasslands, it's fairly quickly done that you get more species in, and then the insects respond and also birds respond. So it's to be seen as the background for our discussion now, that golf courses have enormous potential and could in some places even exceed the value of a conservation area. Okay, we have a few questions formulated in advance, and as I'm not able to show them, I will read these 3 questions to you, maybe twice. So the first thing we should discuss with the panel is this idea of whether or not our recommendations, as they are presented today by Carl, can then be embedded in golf course design or redesign. Or what type of advice a practitioner, let's say a golf course architect or golf course manager, would need from us. So that would be the first point I would like to raise and discuss then together with the panel. So who wants to be first?
Thank you, Johannes. Perhaps just as myself, Marie, and Edwin respond, we'll maybe introduce ourselves because not everyone will be familiar with us. For context, my name is John Kemp. I work as the Assistant Director of Sustainable Golf Development for the RNA. If anyone on the call is not aware of who the RNA are, we are a global governing body. We work alongside national golf federations, industry associations, and a variety of other key stakeholders. With one core aim or agenda, certainly within sustainable golf at least, which is to provide and support best practice advice that ensures an environmentally sustainable future for the places the sport is played. So this study was supported, as mentioned at the outset, by our Golf Course 2030 program, and I think it really is valuable as an insight into something that the golf industry itself would often say. Well, we were quite confident in that fact, which is we firmly believe that golf courses can be and are very good for nature. They provide wonderful opportunities for species, habitats to exist where in some settings they might not otherwise exist, particularly in urban settings. So the study itself, the aim of building a stronger evidence base that golf courses can be good for nature, that some already are, and that can well-considered design or renovation of existing golf courses, so design of new golf courses or renovation of existing. The principle of bringing that to the industry and helping inform golf course architects, golf course developers, owners, operators of existing golf courses, the greenkeepers, superintendents who manage golf courses themselves. All of these stakeholder groups have a control over how those golf courses can be set up to be beneficial for biodiversity, for nature. So bringing the findings from this study, along with a wide variety of rich other information from all around Europe and further afield, is a really important thing for ourselves at the RNA, but I know STURF, the European Institute of Golf Course Architects, many other stakeholders in the industry. So taking this to the industry and helping people just take a slightly more considered approach in how they maintain day to day, but also how they develop new or their existing golfing landscapes that they're so fortunate to have the opportunity to manage. That's a critical first step for us, taking the findings from the study. I'll maybe hand over to Maria.
Should I follow? Yeah.
Sure.
So I'm Maria Strandberg, and I am the director of STURF. The STURF is the Scandinavian Turfgrass Environment and Research Foundation. It's the Nordic Golf Federation's joint research body. And one of our research programs of high priority is the multifunctional golf courses and ecosystem services within where this project is connected to. And the program focuses on how to use golf courses in many different ways in addition to golf. For example, enhance biodiversity, provide important ecosystem services, open up and give areas for outdoor recreation and outdoor activities and recreation for other groups in addition to golfers. And I also would like to mention that this project is very important for the golf sector and for society as a whole, especially in the context of EU nature restoration regulation, which all member countries must have implemented by 2027. And the planning process is going on in all member countries, and in Sweden, for example, the Swedish Golf Federation and STURF is very much involved in creating the National Restoration Plan, which shall be sent to the EU Commission in September 2026. And I think that golf has a very important role to play in at least 3 of the regulation targets. The target focus on pollinating insects, urban ecosystems, and also agriculture ecosystems. And in this context, I think the results and recommendations from this project is and will be very important. So thank you very much for a very valuable and important project.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you.
Yeah. Who is next?
Yes, my name is Edwin Roald. I'm a golf course architect and a certified verifier for GEO certified, the eco label, and have practiced golf course architecture independently for a quarter of a century now, 25 years. And I could say that maybe at least the latter half of that time, the environment, biodiversity, working with degraded land, restoring land, carbon sequestration have been areas of my focus. So yeah, I look forward to taking part in the panel.
Thank you. Then I'm maybe directly asking you in a very simple way. I guess as you have been doing golf course design for more than 20 years, you know how to do it. And then now some people come and have done drone flights and counted some birds and plants. Is that a revolution, or is it basically things Carl showed? Is that supporting the kind of personal experience and practice you have, or is there something new in it?
Do you mean just the recent technology in remote sensing? How are you asking?
That certainly has a big impact, but you can also, as a very good golf course designer, you can use that simply from an aesthetic way or kind of functional way. How long has the fairway to be, or how should the different bunkers be placed, and so on. So you don't need biodiversity research and ecology to make your decision on a drone-based picture, I guess.
I think you're right. I mean, first of all, golf course architecture has somehow managed to make a lot of rules, unwritten rules, shall we say, in terms of how there's a certain convention amongst golfers as to how a golf course, what it should look like, how it should be set up. 18 holes, obviously 9, and then any number of holes that adds up to 18. 18, okay, 9 holes, recently more 12. The makeup of the holes in terms of the playing sequence, par 3s, 4s, 5s. Obviously, certain other parameters or metrics where you try to maybe measure the quality of your design. For example, walking distances from a green to the next tee. Obviously, the width of the playing corridor in terms of finding that right balance of obviously not spending too much on and not breaking more land than you have to for the golf ball to be findable, for players of all levels to be able to play their shots and find their ball in at least reasonably often. So finding that balance between the challenge of the game and then appropriate width. All of these add up, and they add so many constraints really to your project, to your task, that on some sites you sometimes feel that there's almost only one way to actually lay out the course. This is quite common maybe on and can be on some urban or peri-urban sites that are often limited in area. But then there are other, let's say, luxury projects where you've got a lot more land to work with, and that often gives you the ability to select or deny certain areas and only use the most appropriate or suitable areas for the game, and also in terms of engineering and cost. So you're basically only draping the fairways across land that is more suited to the game. So obviously there is a long list of constraints that you're facing, but I think there are a tremendous opportunity. I might be going beyond your question, or you just please don't hesitate. Please don't hesitate to stop me. But there are, I think, absolutely ways to incorporate, I think, tremendous potential for biodiversity into almost even the most contrived design. For example, the areas that you're walking through or across from one green to the next, that's absolutely where you're able to maybe hopefully keep some, or rather, let me rephrase this and say that I'm quite occupied with the thought of introducing wildlife corridors throughout a site, right? And so in my mind as a designer, I think I have these I think a lot about the potential there, and that's where the areas, for example, behind a green that you're playing over from the back tees, which are very, very rarely used, obviously, on a normal golf course, and you're able to kind of ask them to carry a long distance on their tee shots. So those areas, I think, are often underutilized in for example, how we work with them as like wildlife corridors. Introduce more boardwalks across these areas rather than engineering a ground-based way to walk through them, and therefore by obviously compartmentalizing them that way. So I think by trying to join these areas and thinking more holistically about how those corridors can function throughout the site and what's around the site and things like that. So that's the potential that I think we can often work more with. And then I think also after listening to your presentation there, I think that we can communicate more the edge habitats. I think one of the strong sides of golf courses It's kind of like Norway and Canada, isn't it? With the coastline, you know, probably the real estate developer's dream. A lot of coastline, the jagged lines, the outlines of the Norwegian fjords and the Canadian islands. We've got many linear meters of edge, right? We've got weaving outlines of these fairways and mown roughs, and those habitats where you've got obviously the forest, you know, often woodland and a mix of the woodland and light shining through, and I think I think just to share a random takeaway really from the project is that I would, if I'm applying for a planning permission, I think I would try to focus my discussion quite a bit on the edge habitats.
I think that's a very valuable comment. Of course, also the other comments are valuable. Thanks a lot, Edwin. If you take it more systematically, then you would first, when designing or planning a golf course, you would first look at the region and the placement, as you now did, referring to coastlines. And the general wisdom I sense is that a golf course is the more valuable, the more degraded the surrounding landscape is. And that's maybe also a lesson that could be taken up when you have to talk to administrators, urban planners and whatsoever. So doing a golf course in an agricultural landscape that is very rich will most likely not have this great biodiversity effect, because there's already a lot of biodiversity around if it's a traditional landscape like the Norwegian Midlands. But if it's a very poor agricultural landscape or it's an urban landscape, then suddenly you can create a lot of biodiversity because it will be kind of biodiversity hub. That's something I've seen in many of our studies. So that's also things Carl has demonstrated, that the poorer the surrounding landscapes is, the more species we funnily enough have there. It's a kind of zoo effect or whatever you would call it. And then if you dive into the golf course itself, then of course it's the number of habitats. And then as you put it, their configuration. So it's a question of edge. So the more edge, the more species. That's the simple truth. Because a golf course will never be something like a virgin large forest where you have all the big predators and owls, fortunately, otherwise you would not play golf. And so it's somehow imitating a traditional cultural landscape in mid-Sweden or mid-Norway or parts of England or whatever, that is now more or less gone because there's so much intensive agriculture. So the golf course can be a replacement, and doing the design as you put it by introducing a lot of edge is very nice. So many different types of habitats, and then get a long edge, because you don't have that problem as an agricultural landscape where a long edge would mean a lot of exposure to pesticides and fertilizers. So that's not the case in golf courses. And then it comes to quality. And I think there's a lot to be learned. And here our project is also not suitable, because we did not look so much at quality of habitat. So the grassland can have many species or few. It can be acidic or it can be calcareous. The same with ponds or water courses and so on. So and then adding species to that by somehow updating and redesigning it, because the question is, do we take native plants? Do we take native provenances? So it's a big toolbox we could open. It's not covered by that the discussion we have today, but keep that in mind. But basically, I trust you very much that you know what you do and you have a fantastic way of designing golf courses. And then you can take, or others can take, ecological principles on board and see how much they can be used and how much they conflict with the principles you have to follow.
If I might, Johannes,
yeah, go ahead.
Just to add to Edwin and Maria's points, there's a couple of very valuable ones I think they've raised there. Starting with Maria's discussion around essentially, emerging regulation, and Edwin's point around, obtaining planning and permissions to create golf courses or to renovate existing facilities. I think that's a really critical motivation here. The industry, like many industries, is, trying to figure out how it works within emerging and evolving regulatory landscapes. And so, that motivation to do more for biodiversity, to do more for nature, can sometimes be driven by the stick. And in other scenarios, I saw a wonderful comment in the chat there about the value that golfers and volunteers provide for nature and biodiversity. Sometimes that's self-driven. It's driven by the carrot. It's a very positive thing that they want to do. And I think in golf we have this wonderful opportunity to both evolve how we manage, because we need to remain current, to remain relevant, to give ourselves the opportunity to have a thriving sport, and thriving landscapes as part of that. But we also have this opportunity to activate and to motivate a part of society that might otherwise not do what they could do for nature. And I think that's a really valuable point that you make around the potential for golf courses to provide quality of habitat as well, because there are not as many landscape management types, even public parks, etc. They don't necessarily have the same level of resource that golf courses have to invest in maintenance. So within a golf course, you have a greenkeeping team, a golf course superintendent, you have a management team, your administrative structure, all of it there to provide a playing experience, of course. But with that comes the custodianship, the management of the landscape. And they have the resources, the tools that in other landscape settings, they may not have access to those tools or even the ecological expertise that golf has. So not only does golf give the platform or the place for a volume of diversity of habitat and species richness to be found, but it also provides us the opportunity to be good maintainers of it, as well as restoring and designing to restore. I think that's a very valuable opportunity we have, because not everyone can invest the same way that we do in golf courses.
No, I cannot agree more. This is really very true. Yeah.
Yeah, I also have a comment on the quality of habitats, and I think not only the quality of habitats, but also the quality of the whole ecosystems. I mean, golf courses could provide valuable ecosystem services if they are designed and maintained correctly, and that's an important part, I think. And in this context, I also would like to comment on documentation of biodiversity at a golf course or at a golf club, and I think the documentation needs to be as simple as possible if we would like to engage as many golf clubs as possible to document what biodiversity and habitats they have. I mean, if the documentation is too complex and detailed, we will lose the majority of golf courses. So if we want the data of biodiversity or habitats, we need to find a simple way for documentation. And in your report, I think you are mentioned that rough, semi-rough, deciduous woodland and forests can be used as indicator of habitat supporting biodiversity. And I think this is very much in line with the initiative taken by WWF and the Swedish Golf Federation, where what we call the initiative Make Golf Wilder, and we asked the golf clubs to report areas they maintained to support biodiversity. And it could be roughs, it could be woodlands, flowering trees and bushes, sand dunes, ponds, etc. And I think this is the level of documentation we can expect the golf clubs to handle. I mean, the golf clubs will never be motivated to report and identify and report different species and varieties, etc. But the habitat identification, I think, could be a good way to document and report biodiversity.
Thanks. Very good point. We can link it to the message in the chat by Mass from Sweden, I guess. He wrote, what about the importance of contribution of club members in doing non-profit work? And I think that's a valuable resource, because I would not only focus on biodiversity, I would also very much focus on the experience people have with biodiversity, because all that fantastic biodiversity is of little value and will have little future if humans would not appreciate the biodiversity. So therefore, yeah, you are right, Maria. You could do a kind of a consistent monitoring scheme on habitats and taking some simple measures. of qualities, let's say number of flower colors or whatever, and so on. But we have also cases where golfers actually love doing citizen science. So we have a large project in Germany where we also have them involved, and so they photograph wild bees and wasps and even plants, put them into a database. The pictures get certified and analyzed, and then also the message is getting back to the golf course, and that's actually fun. So I think it's a very, very appropriate way of doing it. So Matt's question about the golfers can be answered with a big yes. Yeah, they like being in nature, and sometimes also see more than just green slime outside their cars, and then are curious to see what type of birds or butterflies are around. So that's an important mission, because many of these golfers then also have a say in the society. For example, in Bavaria, very close to one of the leading golf courses, where the Duke or former Duke of Bavaria is an important figure. He's the owner, and he is then spreading his wisdom. And when he tells other people that biodiversity is important, then he has lots of believers. So therefore, I think we have a fantastic audience for reconciling nature and the needs people have that want to do sports.
I think that's something, Johannes, that's reflected in everything that Edwin, Maria, myself, and many others working in golf federations, golf industry within Europe and further afield will see. The opportunity that we have to activate social value or social motivation to benefit biodiversity, but in turn that also provides benefit back to the participants themselves as well. So there will absolutely be members, golfers, participants in the sport who care deeply about this subject and can contribute meaningfully and do every day. There'll also be groups within golf clubs, members, or people who use the facilities from time to time who don't necessarily see the opportunity or haven't ever consciously identified biodiversity as being of benefit to them personally. There's been numerous studies in the past that show that time spent in nature has health benefits. So there are not many other sports that provide the opportunity for an individual to access nature in such high qualities or diversity as the study has almost shown. And then to benefit on that sort of personal level. So even when it comes to articulating and linking this idea back to how we design or redesign existing golf courses to benefit biodiversity, we have to motivate the people who are the key stakeholders, the members of golf clubs or the owners, to help them understand that this is of a business benefit, of a personal benefit as well. So making the economic case, making the social case is a really important part of the narrative that we have to build. So that people appreciate and want to be part of the restoration and conservation of nature.
Good point. Yeah.
There is one, if I may, one observation that I've had, I think, recently in this context of biodiversity on golf courses, and maybe it's because I was lucky or unlucky enough to have training as a journalist before I went into golf. It's very, it's this communication thing, which is our endless task, really. That like here today, we thankfully have the opportunity to talk about the good that we can be doing in golf. But the challenge is always, isn't it, like we've touched on here, that it's so challenging for us to get that message out into the non-golfing public. We can do often when we have the opportunity to submit strong planning proposals in the official process. But we're always dealing with, I think, just recently I was in a meeting amongst a group of residents in connection with a planning proposal. And you can just feel in the air the disbelief in your words, because there is that sense of distrust toward your claims. We just seem to be on the back foot, really, as a stakeholder in the community. That I almost sometimes feel like I'm one of the tobacco manufacturers or something like that. It's so and then there's one thing that I have a tendency to look at as the kind of universal solution. It'll take time, but that's one of the fantastic things I think STERF has done. It's the communication material, the media material from course visits from local schools. Using Maria, you can maybe add to this, but there are some fantastic videos available on how golf courses in Sweden. I think I can mention Motala, Maria. They did it, and and the teachers really. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, this was a short proof of concept study started 2018. The golf course as an outdoor classroom where we take school classes out on the golf course, and we have teaching in all the Swedish curriculum, following the Swedish curriculum. So we're teaching math, languages, everything. And this has been very successful. So it's now spread all over Sweden. I think we have had more than 2,000 pupils visited the new classroom on the golf course, and it's will continue for 2026 and 2027, hopefully spread even more. So that's I think that's also an important part of the biodiversity work to teach and introduce children to this, in this case, the Swedish nature. What is nature? Learn the name of plants and birds, etc. Otherwise, it will not have any meaning for them. They don't know what to protect or preserve if they don't know the names. And so that is a very inspiring projects to work on.
Yeah, the reason I mentioned it is that because one of my takeaways from one of the comments in the videos, or one of the interviews with the teachers, was that they, for example, a biology teacher or a grammar school teacher, they struggle to find perhaps a place that can demonstrate holistic ecosystems in the urban setting.
Yeah.
There they've got infrastructure. They can start with a coffee or something in a small reception in the clubhouse, and then they can take golf carts and have bits of fun with that and go to different places on the property. But the big thing is the marketing thing also involved in that, is that where do these kids then go? They go home and they're asked by their parents, what did you do today? And they'll say, we went on the golf course. And it's like, what? Were you allowed to go there? And everyone can go there, and they've got all this, we saw the bird boxes, and they were teaching us about, the animals that live next to the pond and things, and, and they were able to maybe conclude the day with hitting a few shots and things like that. These children have parents, they've got grandparents. So my tendency is that, John, if we could just fire up a program or an incentive where each and every golf course does this once a year, and I think it could send a ripple effect. And I think it's like you said, Maria, this is one of the biggest inspirations I think I've had.
And it's a big inspiration for the golf courses hosting the classes as well. I mean, they are so positive, and it's also an opportunity to recruit people or children that would never visited a golf course before. So there are a new group of people coming. So, it's a great project, good project.
Yeah. Totally agree with Edwin and Maria. Janis, before you probably want to progress the conversation, but I think it's a great point. And it's, in my role, I'm fortunate sometimes to see that happening in other parts of the world too. Even within Europe, Swiss Golf, for example, have done a program for a couple of years now, very similar in terms of bringing schools to golf courses. Within that, there's the there's the scientific education component, there's the education, the STEM learning, but then there's also the fun, the engagement, the active learning, the physical engagement, the the participation in sport. And I think I don't know many golfers in golf clubs who would be unhappy to see people having fun, people who might never otherwise engage in the sport. I don't know many that would disagree with that being a wonderful outcome of those kinds of initiatives. I've seen them in Australia, I've seen them happening in Asia and Africa too. So I think, this is that overlap between the environmental benefit of the sport and the golf courses that we manage, and when we link them into the social sustainability aspect, the potential for us to make proper, significant community benefit, as many golf courses do already. That's when we have this magic mix that very few other sectors or land uses can provide.
That's fully true. Yeah, we have similar experiences in Germany. In Germany, golf is seen a bit as an elite sport, maybe different from UK, and therefore it's quite important to have that ripple effect when you addressed. Okay, time is fast. Yeah, we have not a kind of mandatory set of questions, but maybe we want to also to move to some other areas. And I would like to follow up on Maria's point regarding the nature conservation law, or restoration law rather, which is then done differently in the European countries. So in Germany, I learned it's mostly about trees, urban, and climate. So there's not so much our federal.
But I think one important part of the regulation is the holistic approach to restore ecosystem and save biodiversity. And the regulation says that all actors in the landscape must be involved in this work. So even golf courses or other landowners need to take part in this work. So if you're,
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Golf has to speak up here, as has also to be handled professionally by the national golf federations to make it more effective. But it may depend on the priorities the countries set when implementing the restoration law. And as far as I see it for Germany, it's the tree card we have to play, and it's mostly also the upgrading urban environments, so which then has a great effect also in terms of air quality and buffering the urban island effect and so on. So, but that may be different in Sweden, and we still have to wait because the plans are not published yet. So it's
but I think it's for us, it has been so very important to play an active role in creating the plans, so that golf already have a place in the plans. I mean, the golf sector is already mentioned in the Swedish plans or suggestion of plans for this restoration work. So I think that
sounds very good. Sounds very good. Otherwise, these more biodiversity-focused initiatives in Germany are mostly then linked to the federal countries. So there's a kind of flower contract in Bavaria or something similar in Baden-Württemberg, where the golf industry gets very close to politicians, and then golf courses are recognized as doing something good for biodiversity. But the point I want to make is that for the restoration law, I think the evaluation will be mostly done remote, because it's simply too expensive to check Europe country-wise on a few butterflies or plants and so on. And therefore, the landscape, so the things we actually addressed today, they will be taken as an indicator for the quality. And here I would say the golf courses have an enormous advantage, because from remote, it looks all very bright in terms of biodiversity. As we said, the quality may be not so good in some cases, because maybe there's a monospecific woodland or shrubs that are only one species or whatever. But from the drone picture or from the satellite, the golf course is a big winner and that card needs to be played. So it's a question, how will we step up this remote sensing, then to use it for design and for management, and then also, of course, for the political aspect, that the Gulf is seen as something contributing to the implementation of the nature restoration law. So how's the feeling on that? So this monitoring in a remote way for not just for designing, but just for recognizing the quality and the contribution of a golf course.
I think it's a deep and multifaceted question, Johannes, but I think responding on a broad way, the level of technology adoption within the golf industry and how the industry, golf course maintenance in particular, is looking at, satellite imaging or sensing as a mechanism to inform management strategies, soil moisture, soil carbon, just even the mapping of golf courses has taken some fairly significant steps forward in terms of its general adoption in golf course management. So I'd say the industry has become a fairly fast adopter of new technologies. And then I think the challenge more holistically for the industry is going to be asking, well, if we already map our golf course for soil moisture, for example, to help us maintain a good quality turf, how can we use that same resource or asset, that same piece of technological solution to also answer the questions that you're asking? How can we provide an appropriate resolution of landscape data, biodiversity data? So that when the golf course superintendent isn't sitting there in the morning and they have to open 10 different programs on their computer to be able to fill out each of the respective management duties. And then at a very practical level, we've seen a variety of different projects that are sort of working with this idea of remote sensing to provide higher or lower resolution of data. England Golf, for example, they've got a biodiversity project that's dedicated to this, and their aspiration is to map every golf course within England, which is some 2,000 plus. That's quite an aspirational goal, obviously. But they accept that to begin with, whilst they work on, and with any of these projects, you start out at a high level, you can improve the resolution as you progress forward. And I think that's where the value lands for the industry as a whole. We have a lot, in some cases, we have so many case studies and local study scientific papers that have been done at a very close resolution. And if we can then overlap that with the lower resolution, the higher level perspective that's offered by remote sensing right now, I think that there's an opportunity to be progressed there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Maya. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah. Well, I think this technology aspect is important, but I mean, really to be successful on the landscape level, working on ecosystems and biodiversity, I think the social ecological system thinking is very important, where the relation between social and ecological system are in the forefront. I mean, we must include, especially in the urban areas, for example, where places where most people want to visit are in many cases the most ecologically sensitive places. So somehow you have to find a partnership, a dialogue between ecological and social aspects to be successful in this work. I mean, the technology it's important, but it cannot solve the need of restoring ecosystems and preserve biodiversity. I think you need to have this social ecological system thinking to be successful.
Yeah, but that's also a kind of research gap, we roughly know how people appreciate landscapes. So
yeah, but I think that's why I think it's important that the multifunctional part of this project will also be completed, because I think some of the answers will be in that part.
True.
Yeah.
That's very true. That's very true. Yeah. Christoph had his hand up as far as I see. That's still up?
Yes, I did. Thank you. It's just a comment on the remote sensing aspect of things. So they mentioned one of the aspirations really was to be able to conduct this analysis at a national scale. Some of the work that we've been doing at UKCEH, actually, we have been producing maps of this nature at the national scale. So later this year, we'll be releasing a high resolution land cover map for England. We don't map all the same land cover classes as we do in this more localized exercise, but just to flag the potential and capabilities that we can now do this at a national level for, say, all golf courses within England, for example. There may be a cost aspect to that. Sometimes we need to purchase the satellite imagery, but there is the technical capability to do this potentially year on year. So not just a single snapshot, but enabled to over time monitor the effect of the management changes that are implemented over time as well, and see how this affects the landscape of the golf course when different measures are implemented. So it's really just a comment to highlight this is achievable using remote sensing data sets.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And I just want also to drop that hint that the National Golf Federations and also RNE and so on should see that potential of the EU restoration law and the way it's monitored, and then matching that with the type of information we have for golf courses, because then the golf courses could play a very prominent role in implementing that law. And I don't see that link so much, at least in Germany, the link is not fully existing between the National Environmental Federation and the golf courses. Okay, I promised to entertain you with help of this fantastic board for 3 quarters, and then we also said we should have some question and answering session. We have 15 minutes left, and I think Christopher will take over as far as I remember. So thank you, Edwin. Thank you, Maria, and thank you, John. Very nice.
Thank you for having us. Very inspiring.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So while we've been chatting, there have been a couple of questions that have been posted in the Q&A and chat. Some of these have been answered in the chat, but just in case they haven't, I'll just cover them again if you haven't seen them. So the first question from Peter was, so you say big and small golf courses, do you have that in hectares? So Carl, you did answer this, but perhaps if you can just come in again and answer that for those who haven't read that in the chat.
Yeah, sure. So what we did with small and big courses is similar to the clustering that we did for the golf courses and the habitat in the buffer, as I said. So what this really means is that the analysis kind of determines on a regional basis what it thinks is a large and a small golf course. It finds these natural differences. So as I put in the chat, that for example, a small course in Germany might be a large course in the United Kingdom. So it's not really a small on absolute scale, but relative to the standard of the region, really.
Okay, thank you. So hopefully that answered that question. There's also a comment from Matt that was covered earlier. So what about the importance of the contribution of club members doing non-profit work? A large number of golfers appreciate the fact that golf is performed in nature. Important incentives for members to enhance biodiversity. So I think we covered this previously and talked about the value that golfers gain both from participating in these natural environments, but also that it does often form an enthusiasm for citizen science and in terms of data collection that could benefit the ecological survey side of things. So another question that we'll move on to. So Ben Matthews, he says, the data presented is incredible in regards to the environmental positivity that golf courses can provide. And it makes sense how it applies to golf course design, redesign and management. I'm interested in what opportunities the findings present in regards to changing public perceptions, particularly the non-golfer community, by demonstrating the environmental benefits that golf courses currently provide and can increasingly provide. I believe highlighting what is being presented here today is critical to changing public perceptions of golf and ensuring we have support of the general public moving forward, i.e. supporting the industry's long-term viability. So following on from that comment, would any of the panel like to feedback their thoughts on that question?
I'll take a first one. I think Ben and we've all probably articulated this and come across this in a number of different ways. Some 2-3 years ago, Maria, you were there. You'll remind me of the date, but we had a meeting of European federations in Paris, brought together kindly by the French Golf Federation, FF Golf, and at that we dedicated the subject matter 2 days to explore and basically just exchange what we had found, what information, what studies, what work had been done in the space of biodiversity nature. And you know, Marie can talk to this, but I think my biggest takeaway, and the other attendees came away from even the first day of that meeting going, wow, we have an absolute wealth of evidence. We've just not spoken about it nearly well enough. And you know, that subsequently has led on to conversations, discussions, a variety of different initiatives that have been essentially seeking to build some momentum behind that idea of communication. Edwin referenced it exactly as well. You know, how do we communicate? How do we tell that story? How do we get the children who have visited a golf course with their school to go home and tell their parents who probably have never thought about going near a golf course in their lives? How do we use that evidence that exists already, is at our wealth at our fingertips, and the more data and research, the better, but to start changing those perceptions externally. And those external perceptions are a wide variety of stakeholder groups, you know, ranging from, you know, continental, regional, national level regulators, but right the way through to conservation bodies, organizations that maybe work more locally, and just the person who neighbors a golf course, who has a home that borders the edge of a golf course and doesn't necessarily think much about it as being part of their community. So I think the resolution and the use of this data, it is almost subject specific, it's almost audience specific. I think we have a huge amount of data and evidence to tell that positive story, but data only goes so far. And I think Edwin's point and Maria's point is really important. It's the personal stories that make it real and that genuinely help people understand how it can apply to them or people like them. So the data and the evidence we aggregate is very important. But to Edwin's point, as a former journalist, we have to tell the story. We have to make it engaging. We have to make it exciting. We have to tell the stories of the BioBlitz that took place, I believe, in a golf course in Denmark, where they found 800 species in 24 hours. It's extraordinary when you step back and have these individual stories. And then for that club, it was just outside Copenhagen, I think it was Roskilde, they you know, they should tell that story locally. They should speak to their local conservation organization who maybe never once thought that a golf course was the right one. But equally, it's then upon ourselves, that global governing body, the national federations, the industry bodies, to then take all those different examples and stories, aggregate them, and present them to regulators, lawmakers, key stakeholders and influencers who make decisions that influence how we manage and maintain and whether golf courses can be built or, you know, changed or continue to exist at all. That's my perhaps long-winded answer, Christopher.
So, thank you. Edwin?
Yes, just very short. I agree wholeheartedly with what John was saying. And it just reminded me that what I meant to say, I think earlier with regard to maybe the insights that I enjoy from journalism is that it's just simply so much easier to write a negative story. And it's when you often, I mean, I often think about this as a designer as well, you often fall into the trap of doing your work to impress your peers. So when, let's say if you're a journalist, to be seen as a critical, investigative journalist, it's usually always about finding a weakness somewhere, finding a negative angle. That's why perhaps thinking outside the box with like real world situations, like just small steps that can obviously have the butterfly effect. I mean, there's quite a appropriate way to explain it by, having the kids communicate what took place on the course. I think it just says so much. It says also that they were welcome there, and things like that. So, and I'm sure many other examples of initiatives that we could take that I haven't just obviously thought of. So yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Edwin. Maria?
Yeah, very short. I mean, it's important to tell our stories, and another successful way is to create a local partnership in which all parties stand to gain. For example, with municipalities, NGOs, landowners, authorities, schools, etc. Because then our stories will be told by others, and the stories gets much more stronger than when it's told by ourselves. So if you involve them in the work on biodiversity, ecosystem services, etc., it's very beneficial.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, following on from the discussions we had once again there about green classrooms and engaging communities and children, there's also George kindly posted that link in the chat. So if you are interested in doing green classrooms, then we're welcome to have a look at the service portal of the German Golf Federation. So I'm sure there'll be lots of interesting material there that we can also look at in this area. So that wraps up the questions that have been posted in the QA in the chat. Did anyone want to offer any further question currently? Please do raise your hand if you do. Okay, Hans Martin.
Yeah, it's not a question. It's I only mentioned that I added a link to the project report in the chat, so you can find it there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing that. If no one else has any questions, I'm just going to pose one here to the panel. So we've conducted this piece of research, which we enjoyed very much. We've found some interesting results, which we've shared today. But when you look at these results and think from your perspectives as to how they could be incorporated in your professions, are there any obvious gaps in the information? So further data or further findings or information in this area that would be really useful for yourselves that can build on the kind of work we're doing and further enhance the integration of this monitoring and biodiversity assessment with golf course design or management. So what is it that you're missing that we could provide essentially?
An excellent question, Christopher. I think if I was to wrap up some of my notes I've made here, that the observations just, incorporating what we've talked about here within this panel, the broad discussion that's been wonderful, and then the study itself. Edwin actually made a really, very kind of valid point early on. He said, the golf industry for a long time kind of created confines that it existed within. It had rules and sort of expectations, and in turn, then it almost perpetuated those. A new golf course looked like a certain kind of way, and how nature was allowed or not, perhaps not part of that design was presented repeatedly. I think what's happened, and like Edwin and many others here, I'm sure, I've worked for the same amount of time in the industry, and my first role was actually in golf course design construction mostly. And in that window of time, I've seen extraordinary changes in terms of how people design golf courses, renovate existing golf courses, and actually what they present as the future of golf course design, golf course renovation, golf course management. And we're moving away from this sort of idea, my perception is that we're moving away from this sort of uniformity this regulation, this idea that golf courses have to be a certain length or they have to be presented a certain way, have to look a certain way. We're moving away from that. We're seeing an awful lot more acclaim to designs and renovations of golf courses that incorporate biodiversity, nature. As one golf course owner described it on a project I worked on once, a sense of place. Because for us, that idea of integrating the golf course into its landscape, that can also be its unique selling point. And then if you're an owner, if you're a developer, if you're someone that manages a golf facility, then clearly there has to be an economic or a business case to make that with it. So my observation here, and you know, there's many others, not least, for example, the value of smaller sites or those in urban settings, which people might naturally presume an urban golf course has, you know, lesser value in biodiversity terms just by the nature of what it is. But it's really fascinating to see what the studies told us. But my biggest observation here is that we have an opportunity as an industry in how we currently manage and how we do manage and redesign golf courses in the future to make nature, biodiversity, the true unique selling point, and for every golf course landscape to lean into what makes it unique. And that can be, you know, something very significant on a large scale, or it could be something that's much more rich but dense, if that was what the terminology we used earlier on. So those are my observations. And I guess in terms of a study, Christopher, I think we've got a social study to dig into to see how golfers and non-golfers feel about that as an idea, how they've seen the evolution of golf courses and their value of biodiversity. I think that'll be an important topic for us to dig into to build the motivation to do some changes.
I think so. I agree completely. I am.
I just
Sorry?
add to John's good comments. I think that the multifunctional part of the project could add an important perspective to your results. Could be a good. I think that it's important to complete that part as well.
Thank you. Okay. Edwin?
Yes, I mean, if I can break the rules, I enjoy doing that actually as a designer, so I'm breaking the rules of this meeting as well and asking a question back if I can. I think the documentation from this project can be of high value to us, and I think it helps us weaponize a little bit. I'd therefore like to ask, has there been perhaps, or have I missed it, or has it been maybe discussed an opportunity to write a peer-reviewed scientific article in connection with this project, or?
That is currently underway. So there will be publications that we will submit that will follow on from this work. So those are currently in progress, based on the work that Carl presented earlier, and other aspects as well.
Okay, brilliant.
Thank you. I am conscious now that we're at 3:30. So if you do have any other further questions, please do feel free to email us after this workshop, and we will do our best to answer those queries. As we are at time now, Hans Martin, would you just like to add a final comment before we wrap up the workshop?
Yeah, I'm very happy with the outcome. Good discussions, good questions, and also those breaking the rules, asking questions back. That's good. We will develop a scientific paper out of it, but we will also develop more popular science type of information guidelines, and it all will end up in this on the same place at the STURF sites. But most of that work is in progress, so it's a bit it's too early to say more about that. And Maria, you are of course right concerning the multifunctionality. It's the tricky part of it, but it's essential. So I would really just say thank you to all of you, all contributions, all participants, and yeah, have a nice evening. all of you. Different
you,
time
everyone.
zones.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very
Bye-bye.
much.
Bye.
See you again. Bye bye.
Bye bye.